Welcome to our special coverage of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I am Ladi Akiridoluale. The headlines. U.S. President warns that Russian invasion of Ukraine has triggered a widespread humanitarian crisis. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov says Moscow may not renew ties with the West. And tattoo artists in Kiev raised money for the Ukrainian war effort. The world is navigating a dark hour in our shared history with Russia's invasion of Ukraine. That's a comment from U.S. President Joe Biden, who told key Asian allies that a crisis in Ukraine was a global issue, which heightens the importance of maintaining international order, territorial integrity, as well as sovereignty. Mr. Biden stressed Washington would stand with its allies and push for a free and open Indo-Pacific region. Mr. Biden's meeting with leaders of Japan, Australia, India, in Tokyo in his first visit to Asia as President of the United States. The four countries, known collectively as the Quad, are discussing security and economic concerns, including China's growing influence in the region and differences over the Russian invasion.
At the same time, we're navigating a dark hour in our shared history. The Russian brutal and unprovoked war against Ukraine has triggered a humanitarian catastrophe, and innocent civilians have killed in the streets, and millions of refugees are internally displaced as well as exiled. And this is more than just a European issue. It's a global issue. It appears to me that Putin is just trying to extinguish a culture. He's not even aiming at military targets anymore. He's taking out every school, every church, every natural history museum, as if to try to obliterate the Ukrainian culture. And the world has to deal with it, and we are. At the same time, the United States must and will be strong, steady, and enduring partner in the Indo-Pacific. We are in the Indo-Pacific. We are an Indo-Pacific power. As once asked by, well, I won't go into it, but I was once asked by the leader of China why I kept talking about being an Indo-Pacific power. I said, because we are. We share the Pacific, one entire side of our country. And we have been deeply involved with all of you for a long time. As long as Russia continues this war, we're going to continue to be partners and lead a global response. And, you know, we're Indo-Pacific power, as I said. We're going to stand with you, our close democratic partners. And we're going to stand for the shared values that and the shared vision we all have. You know, shortly before Russia launched its invasion, my administration published our Indo-Pacific strategy to advance a free, open, connected, secure, and resilient Indo-Pacific. Russia's assault on Ukraine only heightens the importance of those goals. The fundamental principles of international order, territorial integrity and sovereignty, international law, human rights must always be defended, regardless of where they're violated.
Meanwhile, U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin says about 20 countries have announced new security assistance packages for Ukraine. He said this during a virtual meeting with allies that was aimed at coordinating arms for Kiev. The countries that announced new packages included Italy, Denmark, Greece, Norway, and Poland. Mr. Austin told reporters following a meeting of the Ukraine Defense Contact Group. Denmark would provide a Harpoon launcher and missiles to defend Ukraine's coast. The top U.S. military officer, General Mark Marley, told the same press conference that U.S. was still some way from any reintroduction of U.S. forces into Ukraine.
Today, together with Minister Reznikov and his team, we've gained a sharper and shared sense of Ukraine's priority requirements and the situation on the battlefield. We also heard some very welcome announcements this morning about even more security assistance for Ukraine. That includes some 20 countries that announced new security assistance packages. And many countries are donating critically needed artillery ammunition, coastal defense systems, and tanks and other armored vehicles. Others came forward with new commitments for training Ukraine's forces and sustaining its military systems. There are too many countries to properly thank everyone here, but let me mention just a few standouts. I'm especially grateful to Denmark, which announced today that it will provide a Harpoon launcher and missiles to help Ukraine defend its coast. I'd also like to thank the Czech Republic for its substantial support, including a recent donation of attack helicopters, tanks, and rocket systems. Everyone here understands the stakes of this war, and they stretch far beyond Europe. Russia's aggression is an affront to the rules-based international order and a challenge to free people everywhere.
The United States doesn't have any trainers right now in Ukraine. And some of the things that may have been out there in the media, those are planning efforts that are underway at a relatively low level, have not yet made it into the Secretary or myself, for that matter, for refinement of courses of action and what's needed. At the end of the day, any reintroduction of U.S. forces into Ukraine would require a presidential decision. So we're a ways away from anything like that. We're still developing courses of action, and none of that's been presented yet to the Secretary.
President Biden, in an action to officially adopt Colombia as a, quote, major partner, has signed a memorandum designating Colombia as a major non-NATO ally of the United States, a special status that will grant Bogota multiple defense and trade privileges in its relations with Washington. Although the Biden administration made a pledge to grant the special status to Colombia back in March, the official declaration comes only now, coinciding with the South American country's offer of military aid to Ukraine. After his country was designated a major non-NATO ally, Colombian President Ivan Duque took to Twitter to praise Washington for a decision which he says reaffirms the good moment of their bilateral relations. Earlier on in the week, Colombian Defense Minister Diego Molano announced that a group of his country's troops would help train Ukrainian soldiers in demining techniques following a request from Washington. The major non-NATO ally status has been granted to 19 nations around the world, recently including Qatar. It provides U.S. partners with economic privileges such as loans, cooperative research, and exclusive defense contracts with NATO countries. The status, however, does not provide any defense guarantees to the designated countries. The U.S. has exhibited its commitment to Ukraine and its war against Russia, despite the fact that it may not be ending anytime soon. Our Washington correspondent, Maria Bird, has more.
The government has made a major investment in supporting Ukraine in the war against Russia, with military aid packages and artillery being provided.
Mr. Speaker, I rise in support of the additional Ukraine Supplemental Appropriations Act, which provides $40.1 billion in much-needed emergency security, economic, and humanitarian aid to support the Ukrainian people and defend global democracy in the wake of Russia's unprovoked attack on Ukraine.
While the U.S. government has stood in solidarity since the beginning of the war, U.S.-owned businesses such as Starbucks are responding to Russia's attack on Ukraine by removing their stores from Russia as a means to impact the Russian economy.
A company in America cannot afford to have a good chunk of its customer base either rebelling or protesting against the company simply because it has less than 1% of its revenues in a country that is going against American values.
As U.S. businesses take a stand against Russia through economic impact, the Russia-Ukraine war is the top of the agenda in Davos, Switzerland, as business leaders gather at the World Economic Forum to discuss the economic impact of the war and the economic crises that most of the world is experiencing. From Washington, Maria Bird, Channel Television News.
Let's talk now a bit more about this to Maria. She joins us for more from our Washington Bureau. Hi, Maria.
Hello, good morning.
Good morning to you. Now, quite a number of countries have left, particularly U.S. companies, that is, have left Russia. We are seeing more. You mentioned Starbucks in your report. But what I'm looking at now is a situation where one is looking at the economic fallout of the decisions to leave because as you referenced, there are quite a number of their customers were in Russia and they were having a revenue from there, but then the customers back in the U.S. didn't want that anymore. How have those companies navigated this balance?
Well, these companies have obviously been looking into this for quite some time now, since the beginning of the war. You're not only looking at Starbucks, you're looking at one of the major players, McDonald's, that has left and taken down their golden arches. And so we know that the U.S., especially businesses, are going to be impacted, but they found a way to be able to support, obviously, Ukraine in this way. As we know, not only is this affecting the U.S. and Ukraine, but it's affecting the global economy. And so even though these companies are definitely going to be impacted by removing their stores from Russia, they know in the long term, the economic stability will be one that will be to the benefit of the world economy and obviously these businesses as well.
When last I spoke to you, we discussed in some detail the economic impact within the United States. And then, of course, all the rage was about the prices of gas at the pumps. But for now, how is that holding up? How is the support of the ordinary U.S. citizen holding up for the administration's policy on Ukraine? And then how is that affecting their wallets in the 13th week now of this war?
As you discussed earlier, you see President Biden is making his first trip to Asia. He obviously knows that the American people are becoming a bit weakened, obviously economically, by what's happening with Ukraine and Russia. And he knows that it's going to take a little bit more than trying to adjust and to reduce inflation here in the U.S. And it's going to take the entire world. As we've seen with the World Economic Forum, it's been said that the whole world could be heading into a recession. And so he's very much aware of that. He's very much aware of how much of an impact this war has had on the U.S. economy, especially being as though the U.S. has been a front runner and obviously in the forefront of supporting Ukraine in this war, not only financially, but also politically. And he knows that the U.S. Economy and the American people will only be able to withstand so much longer because it is expected that potentially we could be not only looking at increase in inflation, but also unemployment rates could increase. And we know that the employment in the U.S. has definitely been skyrocketing over the past few months. So it is very clear that the American people could be becoming a bit fatigued in the coming months.
That then brings up the politics of all of this then, because come November, which is inching closer slowly but surely, there'll be the midterm elections. And as you and I have discussed in the past, in the recent past, that is usually not favorable to whichever party is in the White House. And now you have the situation with the war in Ukraine. You've got this economic impact. How is that playing out, do you think, as we take a look ahead towards the midterms?
Well, the midterm elections, we know that the Republican Party has been working very hard, obviously, over the past few months to discuss how the president has failed our economy. And so that is going to definitely play a very strong hold as we look toward the midterm elections. We've already started to see some of these races, especially Pennsylvania, that have come out, and we see where many of the Republicans are getting major support. The real question is it going to be the Republicans of the George Bush era, the Cheney era, or are we going to see the new Republican Party, which has really been born out of the former President Trump's administration? And so that's where I think the rubber is going to meet the road with the Republican Party. Are those Republicans going to be able to have enough impact and be able to show what they believe has not been done by the Democratic Party, and specifically the president? And as you mentioned before, is the economy going to become a focal point, and is this war going to be blamed for some of what is happening with the U.S. economy? And that's, I think, where we're going to see a tipping point as it relates to the results in the upcoming election. But the president has a few more months ahead of him. He's obviously working very hard. As we said before, he's in Asia as we speak, trying to ensure that there's going to be, and there's also going to be an economic plan that will be released today that President Biden will bring forth. And so that plan obviously is going to definitely address all of these areas that we've just briefly discussed.
Those of us who are outside the United States looking in, and those of you who are inside the United States looking out, may have somewhat different ideas of what is really going on the ground. We see President Biden taking leadership, being front and center. He just came back from Europe. Now he's in Asia and all of that. But then there are critics who have said that all this movement might be in some way to distract from some of the domestic difficulties that the war in Ukraine has brought about, particularly with energy prices, and that he's traveling a lot and he's emphasizing this because he wants world attention and U.S. attention to focus on it and what he's doing with Ukraine. Is that a fair comment? Is that what is really happening? You're in there.
You know, that's a very fair comment. And I think that the real question now is that I think whether or not the president is focusing in on what part of what he was elected on. He was elected on the fact that he had a very strong foreign relations background. That's what he did in Congress. That's the work that he did in the Obama administration as vice president. And so his relationships overseas have always been one of his strengths. And I think he's going to definitely capitalize on that, especially since the former President Donald Trump was so criticized for his failure and what many believe was a failure in his foreign relationships and his ability to really put the U.S. as a forefront in the global economy and obviously on the world stage politically. And I think that's what President Biden is hoping to capitalize on. He's hoping to bridge and mend some of the relationships so that obviously the U.S. can be in a better position, not only from an import perspective, but also an export perspective, which is going to have major impacts on the economy as well. And so that, I think, is what his plan is. You're exactly correct. He is going to be receiving and has received some criticism at home for not paying attention to some of the internal issues. But it looks like his focus is going to be, let me go outside where many believe that was a failure in the previous administration. And hopefully that will have a positive impact on the internal situations in the U.S., whether or not it's health, whether it's energy, whether it's environmental, or obviously the economy.
Indeed, Maria, thank you for your perspective and for your reporting this morning. We'll be back with you, I'm sure, very soon. Thank you. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says Russia had launched 1,474 missile strikes since the start of the invasion, and confirms that 87 people were killed in a strike on barracks housing troops in the northern town of Desna. According to him, the dismantling of debris in Desna, the Chernihiv region, has been completed. 87 people were killed, and there were only 4 missiles. In total, the Russian army has used 1,474 missile strikes of different types. Previously, Kiev had said 8 people died in the May 17 strike in Desna. The updated number of fatalities makes it Ukraine's worst military loss from a single attack of the war. Kiev says Russian forces had tried to storm Severodonetsk but were unsuccessful and retreated. The city lies in the easternmost part of a Ukrainian-held pocket of the Donbass and is one of the last areas of Luhansk still outside Russia's grip. Mr. Zelensky urged Ukrainians to support the country's armed forces in its efforts against Russian forces. Every voice matters, according to him. Turkey's President Tayyip Erdogan says that Greek Prime Minister Kyriakos Mitsotakis no longer existed for him after he visited the United States and accused Mitsotakis of trying to block sales of F-16 fighters to Turkey. In his words, we had agreed to not include third countries in our dispute with him. Despite this, last week he had a visit to the U.S. and talked to the U.S. Congress and warned them not to give F-16s to us. Mr. Erdogan also said his country would do whatever was necessary with regards to Sweden and Finland's NATO membership, but only after Turkey perceived a change in both countries' quote, attitude. Blaming both for harboring terrorists, Mr. Erdogan said solid implementation was necessary for Turkey's support for their NATO membership. Mr. Erdogan also said Ankara would soon launch new military operations along its southern borders to create a 30-kilometer deep safe zone to combat terrorist threats from these regions. The Turkish president says the operations will be launched as soon as military, intelligence and security forces have completed their preparations. Finland has pledged its army will continue to push for its membership of the NATO alliance. The commander of the Army Academy, which conducted a military exercise in Rojavary, Colonel Sami Antti-Takma, said, quote, "What we will get, the answer is quite easy. We will get the Article 5, and what we'll bring to NATO is that we have quite a strong army up here in the north." Finland and Sweden formally applied to join the NATO alliance on May the 18th, a decision spurred by Russia's invasion of Ukraine, but face objections from Turkey to an accession process that is expected to take only a few weeks. The Article 5 security guarantee comes into effect when membership is gained, a process which requires all 30 NATO states to accept the country's applications. Takama, who oversaw the exercise, said the army was monitoring the ongoing situation in Ukraine and was following what their eastern neighbor Russia was doing. The exercise will continue until May the 27th. And coming up after the break, Germany's economy minister says EU agreement on Russia. Thanks for staying tuned. Welcome back to the program. A local military says the center of Ukraine's second largest city, Kharkiv, came under intense shelling on Monday. According to a military engineer, Mykola Tymoshenko, who specializes in disarming unexploded ordnance, it was an attack by the Uragan system. The center of the city was shelled with cluster bombs. The Uragan, otherwise known as Hurricane, is a self-propelled multiple rocket launcher system designed in the Soviet Union, which can be used to deliver cluster munitions to release tens or hundreds of sub-munitions. One person was injured in the shelling of the city, the first since Russian forces were driven back from the positions around it. Kharkiv, near the Russian border with a pre-war population of 1.5 million, was a key military objective earlier in the war when Moscow hoped to capture and hold major cities. After weeks of heavy bombardment, Ukrainian forces in mid-May pushed back the Russian units, attempting to encircle Kharkiv, and drove them back to the Russian border. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov says Moscow will consider offers of re-establishing ties with the West and think whether that is needed, but will focus on developing ties with China. According to him, now that the West has taken a, quote, dictator's position, our economic ties with China will grow even faster. An outgoing Philippine President Rodrigo Duterte has sharply criticized Vladimir Putin for the killing of innocent civilians in Ukraine, saying while the two of them have been tagged as killers, I kill criminals, I don't kill children and the elderly. Mr. Duterte, who openly calls Putin an idol and a friend, voiced his rebuke for the first time over Russia's invasion of Ukraine in remarks aired yesterday, where he blamed the 3-month-old war for the spike in global oil prices that have battered many countries, including the Philippines. While stressing that he was not condemning the Russian president, Mr. Duterte disagreed with Mr. Putin's labeling of the invasion as a special military operation and said it was really a full-scale war waged against a sovereign nation. The International Labour Organization said in a report on the global job market that it is at risk of doing a U-turn on its path towards recovering to pre-COVID-19 levels as lockdowns in China and the war in Ukraine weigh on economies. The UN agency estimated that there was the equivalent of 112 million fewer full-time jobs in the first quarter of 2022 compared with pre-COVID levels, and there was a growing but uncertain risk that the amount of hours worked would continue to decline over 2022. China accounted for 86% of the dip in working hours due to containment measures to stop the spread of COVID-19. According to the special report, global supply chain disruptions have also been exacerbated by the war in Ukraine, and these have threatened to lead to a further decline. ILO Director General Guy Ryder explained that the figures likely do not capture the effects of the Ukraine war yet.
Brief in English. Guidewriter. What we can say at this stage is that the deterioration, as we reported in the air monitor, are to a large extent actually due to the global supply chain disruptions, which mainly coming from China.
At that time, we estimated that hours worked globally would be 2.4% below pre-pandemic levels, so we've downgraded that rather to 3.8%, and we had thought at that time that the job deficit would be 70 million full-time jobs worldwide. As I've said, we now moved that up to 112 million. So, as you can see, there is a marked deterioration in the situation. We see a growing risk of a continuing deterioration in the number of hours worked globally for the rest of 2022. In fact, globally, the number of hours worked is expected to decline further in the second quarter of 2022. The ILO's latest projection for this period is that the level of hours worked will be 4.2% below pre-pandemic level. That is equivalent to a deficit of 123 million full-time jobs.
Let's talk now to Professor Olufemi Saibu, who is the director of the Institute of Nigeria-China Development Studies at the University of Lagos. He joins us virtually. Good morning, Prof. Thank you for your time.
Yeah, good morning.
Let's, I want to take a look at the role of China in all of this. China has received, depending on who you talk to, commendation, condemnation, and it has been issued warnings by some of the parties involved in the conflict in Ukraine. But China has maintained this strategic silence all through all of this. What do you think the game plan is for China? Is it hoping to play the role of a peacemaker, or is it trying to stand as another arm of a world order which is not under the control of the West?
Yes, you know, for some time now, China has been trying to favorably compete against the United States and has been looking for opportunity to ensure that at least without necessarily triggering any kind of negative effect on the economy, and then these opportunities of the Ukrainian war give them the opportunity as well to be able to take advantage of this now, to leverage on the global economy to ensure that they take advantage of the crisis between the Russia and then the Europe as well. So for now, they will be very, very cautious, and then they will ensure that at least they look at the balance of the game and ensure that their national interest is most important to them than any other arrangement. So given the direction now, they are looking for opportunity to ensure that without hurting the economy, they take the full advantage of the war. And the recent event regarding Taiwan also make China to feel that, well, if this is the way of the US paying back for their silence regarding the Russian invasion of Ukraine, then they are ready to go all out to ensure that they protect their interests. And again, whatever concession they were trying to give regarding the Ukrainian war, they are now trying to tighten their ropes and ensure that then they have to go all out to defend their interests, irrespective of what happens in other parts of the world.
The situation with Ukraine has exposed some fault lines, it would appear, because prior to now, there was this like scaffolding over the relationship between China on one hand and Russia, and then, of course, Western allies like the United States, Britain, and France, and the European Union on the other. But as you've just pointed out, President Joe Biden said that if China were to attack Taiwan, there will be a military response from the United States in support of Taiwan. Now, this was not the situation prior to now. Everybody had avoided talking about it, particularly the US and China. You've said now China will go all out. So I guess the whole issue of them playing peacemaker is gone as well.
Sure. Now, the Chinese generally, they try to go more for diplomacy than confrontation. Even in the higher levels of situation in the past, they try to ensure that they play the situation down as well. But notwithstanding, they have their interest at core of whatever they are doing. And given the situation now, they feel that they have to do everything to protect their interest without directly hurting the interest of their partners. So now they still want to play the role of the peacemaker to ensure if there are better ways of resolving the Ukrainian-Russian crisis, but at the same time to ensure that the spillover of Ukraine does not affect their relationship with the US in terms of protecting their interest in Taiwan and as well in Hong Kong. So they will be ready now to ensure that if Russia does this, and this is the response, then when the need arises for them to do the same thing for Taiwan or Hong Kong, this is what the US is going to do. And therefore, they also want to go deeper in building network relationship across other countries as well, and ensure that they protect their interests and ensure whatever the consequences that the Russia and Ukraine war are going to have is minimized in the future on them.
There are some people who have called the meeting that President Joe Biden is attending in Asia at the moment with Australia, India, and Japan as the Quad in fear. That all those other countries, Australia, India, and Japan, are now seeking shelter under the United States umbrella because they're afraid that with what Russia is doing in Ukraine and what China may be thinking of doing in Taiwan, they need some protection. They cannot remain neutral in all of this. Do you see that as the point? And is it possible that China may try to draw them back under the umbrella of saying, look, we mean no harm to you?
Yes, the Chinese government really want to retain their partners, and they also know the implication on the economy and then the overall effect on the global stability. But many of those countries who are trying to keep quiet, not many of them who are quiet now, not necessarily they are supporting the US or the Euro, but their fear is the effect of that after the Ukrainian and the Russian crisis is resolved. So they will try to strike a balance, being a good friend of the China and again being good books of the US. And that's why you see all of them trying to always be at least playing the double head roles with the two competing global leaders.
Indeed, Professor Olufemi Saibo, thank you so much. Professor Saibo is the director of the Institute of Nigeria-China Development Studies at the University of Lagos. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Starbucks has announced its exit from Russia after nearly 15 years, joining a wave of American companies pulling out of that country in response to the war in Ukraine. Seattle-based Starbucks has 130 stores in Russia with nearly 2,000 employees in the country. In March, Starbucks shuttered its stores and suspended all business activity in Russia, including the shipment of its products to the country. Starbucks' move comes a week after an even more iconic American company, McDonald's, pulled the plug on its Russian restaurants.
Really, this is not that meaningful. The Russian operations were less than 1% of revenues, and they were not owned stores. So the profitability on those stores is probably lower as well. So we're talking about a less than 1% earnings impact. Well, I think it's a necessary move. There was no way that Starbucks could legitimately continue operating in Russia with no end in sight in the war, and its perception in the market and its clientele very focused on good corporate behavior from this company. So they needed to make this move. Well, it's hard to judge just how much the management was focused on a certain time or action from Russia to determine when it was just too far gone. The move in March, early March, by the way, there was only a couple weeks after the war had started, effectively shut down the operations. And then this is just the official shutdown. And maybe there was something in management's mind that said, if this could be resolved, then longer term we'll have the ability to reopen those stores. And I think they've just realized that Putin has gone a little bit too far on this and just can't be reversed.
Hungary has stuck to its demands for energy investment before it agrees to a Russian oil embargo, clashing with European Union states, pushing for swift approval of more sanctions against Moscow for invading Ukraine. Solutions first, sanctions afterwards. Hungary's Justice Minister Judith Varga said ahead of talks in Brussels about what would be the 6th package of EU sanctions on Russia since it invaded Ukraine on February the 24th. The comment came as the European Commission earlier this month proposed new sanctions, but Hungary's opposition has so far barred the unanimity of all the 27 member countries needed to approve them. Hungary, which is heavily dependent on Russian oil, has said it would need about 750 million euros in short-term investments to upgrade refineries and expand a pipeline bringing oil from Croatia.
So first we have to have a strategic planning, how to phase out on the long run these fossil resources. The second one is the pipeline issue, because if we want to replace Russian oil through the Adriatic pipeline, this needs a lot of infrastructure investments, which is not only on the side of the Hungarian, but also on the other side of other partners, other countries of the members of the European Union. We need to see the Commission's solutions. That's why we say solutions first and then sanctions afterwards.
German Economy Minister Robert Habeck says that the European Union will likely agree on an embargo on Russian oil imports within days. Habeck, however, warned that an embargo would not automatically weaken the Kremlin, as rising prices were enabling it to rake in more income while selling lower volumes of oil. Therefore, one consideration was to no longer pay any price for oil, but to agree on upper limits. For that to work, however, many countries would have to get on board. Let's talk to Laddie Williams, as we do every day of this week. Laddie, hi.
Hi, good morning.
Well, I just want to reference the last story I just read.
Right.
More and more, shall we say, innovative moves there. Now, we're talking not just about banning Russian oil, we're also talking about putting an upper limit on the prices that people can pay. The question will be, how do you enforce that?
Exactly, because you need a consensus, for that to, actually work. And, we've seen how divided Europe is with, trying to wean off, Russian oil and gas, at this time. But, at the end of the day, we've seen how this is actually helping, the Russian economy. Like we see the ruble now, hitting, a new high, against the dollar and also the euro. And this is because people are still paying, these hefty prices for oil. Some of these European countries are now paying, in ruble, for their gas needs.
They're just not talking about it very loudly.
Exactly. So, a lot is going on, and this is all helping to, strengthen the Russian economy at this point, keep the ruble high. And we also know about the capital controls they've also put in place. So at the end of the day, we're seeing, oil prices, have this seesaw movement. It's concerns about demand. We're seeing the price pull back this morning because of, concerns about, demand at this point.
Right.
The fear of recession. We've seen how central banks are raising rates at this point without care for, the global economy.
Yeah.
So at the end of the day, it's also, inching into the oil prices, bringing it down. But we know how these supply disruptions have a way of propping back, the oil price. So we just keep watching this
the ECB
movement.
is planning an end to negative rates because inflation is soaring. Every day of the several weeks now, we've all talked about inflation, and as you just referenced, they seem to have given up on all concerns about balancing that against the possibility of a recession.
Exactly.
Because things are really going bad now. But I guess the end to negative rates will also have impact on the businesses who had borrowed cheaply in the past.
Yeah, because now you have to, because the ECB, they've been on the background when it comes to raising rates. They've not, the Fed has raised how many times? We've seen the Bank of England also raise rates, but the ECB, they've been watching, trying to also see how they can keep the economy, going. But they're saying at this point, with the way inflation is going, especially in the Eurozone, they have to start, thinking about raising rates at this point. And once they start raising rates, we saw how, they tried to support businesses, with the onset of COVID,
right?
Buying all those bonds. But now we're seeing all these central bankers, shed, all of these bonds from their balance sheet. They're selling it off, trying to, tame inflation at with all they have, at this point. It's not easy, I must say, because you have to. It's like a balancing. There's really no way to balance this because we're seeing inflation just keep, skyrocketing. So the ECB is coming out and saying, you know what, we're going to start raising rates. Businesses, you have to prepare, at this point, no more negative interest rate, no more free money, at this point. We know that how that is going to impact, businesses. And it also impacted the markets. We saw European markets, actually drop, yesterday, all on this concerns about...
Let me put you on pause, Ladi. We'll take a break. When we come back, we'll round up our discussion because I still have to ask you about Starbucks.
Right, Starbucks.
Leaving Russia. Right. So after the break, Ukrainian tattoo artists raise money for the war effort. Please join us again. Thanks for staying tuned. Just before the break, we're taking a look at some of the top business economic stories that have emanated from the war in Ukraine. And I have our business correspondent, Ladi Williams, here. Ladi, we referenced it briefly earlier, but Starbucks is well known for those who take a lot of caffeine.
Right, and I am a big fan of coffee.
The Russians are known for that as well.
Oh, yes.
But Starbucks is leaving Russia. And one of the analysts that were featured earlier in the program talked about the fact that it's not really a big move because Russia, the Russian market in terms of Starbucks is less than 1% of their revenue.
Exactly, and I actually agree with that because FDI, plays a little part when it comes to revenue for the Russian economy. They make most of the revenue from, their exports. So FDIs don't, amount for much. But at the end of the day, these companies actually employ, a huge amount of Russians. And they're saying they'll still continue, paying for the next 6 months. They'll continue paying their employees there. But, it remains to be seen if this war continues, can they still keep paying, But at the end of the day, we know it's not that much of an impact, but we've seen a lot of companies actually leave Russia or, pause their services in Russia at this point. It has an impact, on the Russian economy because at the end of the day, these companies, they employ, people. They also, their technologies also help, the Russian economy, their services. We've seen some of the big UK service companies actually leave Russia. But at the end of the day, it's not a big blow, to revenue in the scheme of things, with how Russia has been able to, manage their resources and, keep their exports, going and, making all of that money from exports. But at the end of the day, it's not a good look, when you see this kind of exodus, from an economy. So, but we're seeing some analysts are saying the impact won't be felt now, but in the long term, in the long run, the impact will surely be felt because most of these companies are gonna, even after the war, some of them will still want to keep their services and their companies out of Russia. But it's cost these companies, too, a lot of money.
A lot of money, yeah, to
some
make
of them have
hurried
had
exits.
Yeah, because imagine taking your business out of a whole country. That revenue is gone, So
and suddenly, without your thinking about it previously,
exactly. And this has impacted most of their first quarter earnings for some of these companies that have left. Like
I can't let you leave without asking you, of course, about our home, because yesterday we talked about it and the fact that our central bank is also meeting. Today is decision day.
Decision day today.
And as we've talked in the past, across the world, many central bankers have a dilemma between taming inflation and preventing recession.
Exactly.
We also have that same dilemma, but today we're going to find out on what side the central bank. What are your sources telling you?
Even though our rates are pretty high
already, so we don't have as much wiggle room as
others would. So it's still a divide at this point. Some analysts say they're going to hold. Some are saying, with everything that's going on right now, they should actually raise rate. They're expecting, a hawkish stance from the central bank. But at the end of the day, a hold seems, more likely, because we know how the Central Bank of Nigeria is, trying to also nurture this our growth, that this
and it's quite fragile.
It's quite fragile because if they go aggressive, at this point, it could stoke a fast recession. Nigeria. We saw our GDP report for the first quarter. And it was quite impressive, about 3.11%. So they would want to see that go on,
especially in the run-up to an election.
Exactly, and knowing that Nigeria is a peculiar kind of country when it comes to, rates and all of these. So we'll be watching out. We'll be covering that live.
Yes, indeed.
11 a.m.
11 a.m. today.
Yeah, they switched it this time.
They brought it back. they brought it forward. So
exactly.
in less than thereabouts an hour plus now,
we'll get that decision.
we get the decision. So please watch out for that here on channels. That will be on, we'll have all the analysis in the run-up to that on Business Morning. And then later on, the post-decision analysis on Business Incorporated. Ladi, thank you.
Thank you.
Let's talk some sports. World #1 tennis player Novak Djokovic says Wimbledon's decision to ban Russian and Belarusian players from this year's tournament following the invasion of Ukraine was wrong and lacked respect. The All England Lawn Tennis Club took the decision following Russia's invasion in February. As a result, Wimbledon was stripped of its ranking points by both the ATP and WTA tours. Djokovic believes the two tennis bodies' response to the Wimbledon decision was a reaction to a mistake.
I'm glad that players got together with the ATP, the governing body of the men's tennis, and showed to the Grand Slam that when there is a mistake happening, and there was from the Wimbledon side, then we have to show that there's going to be some consequences. So I support the players. Unification, always. I've always done that. I will always do that. So I think it was a wrong decision. I don't support that at all. But during these times, it's super sensitive subject, and anything that you decide, it's unfortunately going to create a lot of conflict, a lot of separation instead of unification.
Meanwhile, four-time major winner Naomi Osaka has said she's unsure if she will play Wimbledon, given reasons that without ranking points, the tournament is more like an exhibition. The ATP and WTA stripped the points after Wimbledon had banned Russian and Belarusian players. Even though Osaka did not criticize the move, she said earning points was a motivation for her. The former world #1 was speaking after her first-round defeat by Amanda Anisimova at the French Open on Monday. Meanwhile, Ukraine's Olesia Tsurenko has called for stronger support of her country from the tennis world, saying she is desperate not to play Russians or Belarusians on the tour. The 32-year-old, who lost in the first round to Iga Swiatek, thanked her opponent for wearing a Ukraine pin, but said more players needed to speak out. She has played against Russians several times this year already, including once since the invasion. Tsurenko backed Wimbledon's decision to ban players from Russia and Belarus.
I don't know if I can ask players to care more, but I would like to see that from the players, from WTA, from ATP. I would like top players just to support more and to show more understanding of what is really going on. because it's just, you know, it's just life. I don't feel good to play against Russian and Belarusian players just because it reminds me what is going on in my country. I don't feel good, and it was also another question that I had inside of me, if I should play or I should just give up, you know, should I just decide not to play against them? But it's painful, I'll be honest, it's very painful, and I'm always hoping not to get them in my draw.
Ukraine will win the war with Russia, and that's according to actor and director Liev Schreiber, who made this comment on the fringes of the World Economic Forum. Mr. Schreiber, whose grandfather was of Ukrainian and Polish descent, said that he had been overwhelmed by the resilience of the Ukrainian people and visits to the country since Russia sent thousands of troops in on February the 24th. In terms of what's needed, support, financial support, strategy, reconstruction, all these things are perfectly suited, I think, to the World Economic Forum. Mr. Schreiber himself helped to set up the Blue Check Network, which aims to verify and link up aid organizations on the ground with donors. A new postage stamp featuring the destroyed Russian warship Moskva drew crowds on Ukraine's Navy Day in Kiev. The Ukrainian President, Volodymyr Zelensky, signed some of the stamps and started the sale together with the head of the Ukrainian Postal Service. More than a month after the first successful launch of a stamp featuring the same design, the new stamp is dedicated to the actual sinking of the Russian warship. The new stamp now has a message that reads, "Russian warship is done." And finally, in a fashionably scruffy former factory in central Kiev, tattoo artists ply their trade to raise money for Ukraine's armed forces fighting fierce battles in the country's east. Every Saturday for the past 7 weeks, a tattoo marathon has been inking customers, with funds raised being donated to Ukraine's forces who have been fighting Russian troops since Moscow invaded Ukraine on February the 24th. On a typical Saturday, 50 to 70 punters get tattoos from a group of 15 artists. The tattoo marathon takes place in Kiev's trendy Podol district, a pre-war hipster hub which is showing signs of revival. For some, inspiration came during the most terrifying days of the war. The man who started it all, 34-year-old Shasha Flipchenko, a native of the Crimea Peninsula, says the initiative has raised about $9,100 so far. And that's our program this morning. Thanks for being with us. My name is Ladi Akiridoluale. There's another update within the world today at 5 o'clock. Do watch out for that. And the show is back tomorrow morning. For now, do have yourselves a pleasant Tuesday ahead.